Alright, so this is Mr. Grimsland here, in for Mr. Nolan, and we're going to be talking about Indus River Valley civilization today. Um, so we already talked about Mesopotamia, we already talked about Egypt, and now we're going to move on to Indus River Valley. So the geography, it's referred to as a subcontinent, India is, and that's because it wasn't originally part of Asia. Millions of years ago, it was its own kind of continent, and it merged into Asia, and that's why we have big Himalayan mountains there. That's why we have the Hindu Kush mountain ranges, because when two continents collide like that, when two plates collide, that creates mountain ranges. So we have the Hindu Kush and the Himalayan mountains, as well as desert to the east. So there's natural barriers that protect the Indus River civilizations from invasion. Um, and we'll see that they actually grow somewhat isolated from other civilizations, although there is some trade that will happen we'll talk about. Monsoons are periods of seasonal winds that lead to wet and dry periods. So that's going to be a big thing in India. You're going to have big periods of heavy rainfall, and then that's going to be followed by big periods of just dryness. So the monsoon is something that the people in the Indus River had to deal with. Um, and the two rivers you're going to be focusing on here, obviously the Indus River, like we've been talking about, but also the Ganges River. Those are the two big rivers in India. Um, and the yearly floods of these rivers will bring silt for agriculture, but they're also a little bit unpredictable, and the rivers are going to change course a little bit over time. So people in these civilizations are going to have to deal with those factors. Um, and then as far as the impact of geography goes, what types of challenges did the people in the Indus River face? Well, we've already talked about the unpredictable flooding. So we know the devastating effects that can happen when floods happen. It could wash away your house, or it can wash away a village. It can wash away your crops. It can ruin your crops. So it could be a problem that in those ways. The monsoon is going to be wet and dry periods, like we said, so that people are going to have to deal with that. And then the rivers changing course are also another factor. As far as advantages, those mountain ranges are going to provide good protection from invasion. So you don't see a whole lot of invaders, especially not from the east. Crossing over the Himalayas is very difficult. Um, you will see some invaders from the west over time, but we won't worry about them right now. And then, of course, the good farmland from the silt deposits. Those floods are going to leave behind silt deposits, and that's going to be where we have good farming. And we know that because the rivers there provide silt and there's good farmland, that's a good spot for civilization to appear. So societal advances for the Indus River Valley civilization. The big thing you need to know is that city planning was based on a grid system. So it was more complicated than Egyptian and Mesopotamian cities, which were just kind of sprawled out all over the place. You should know that the cities in the Indus River were very structured on a grid system, so they're very organized and very complicated in that fashion. And one of the major cities was Harappa. Sometimes Indus civilization is called Harappan civilization. Another advance was, we talked about those floods. They created these levees, and a levee is kind of like a wall that you can manipulate, and you can use it to keep the water in or to keep it out, control the water levels. And they created those and were able to use that to their advantage. More societal advances. Another big one is complex sewage and plumbing systems. We're going to see our first bathrooms, our first baths. Not quite showers per se like we know them today, but they were able to go into a bathroom or pour water over themselves and clean themselves, and the water would go through the plumbing and the sewage system outside of the city. Relatively clean, not up to modern day standards, of course, but these are going to be the first bathrooms and showers and baths that we see in society. And they made clay toys when archaeologists uncovered them. Previously, we had only seen things. We don't see a lot of weapons here. We don't see a lot of everyday business type of things. We see more. We see toys. We see things of that nature that let us know that people in the society, were able to relax a little bit, have some leisure time. So we know that was the case for some people in the society. This slide right here, this kind of shows the grid system of the city. The picture on top, you can see it's kind of laid out in a grid formation. And then there's a picture of a bath down there in the bottom picture, and that would have been filled up with water, and then it would have drained through the sewage and plumbing systems that we talked about. So culture in Indus River Valley, they developed a written language. We have yet to be able to decipher it. Artifacts suggest a prosperous society. Like we said earlier, there was few weapons found, so we can imply based on that there weren't a whole lot of invaders over the course of this Indus River Valley civilization. We know that animal imagery was important, and we know that religion will show early ties to Hinduism, which we'll get into next unit. And we're going to see the beginnings of trade by land and sea with distant cultures. So as far as the government goes, it's going to be a theocracy, just like Egypt, just like Mesopotamia. Religious leaders will control the government. And we're not going to see huge social division, but there's still that social structure with religious leaders, merchants, landowners up at the top, and then the commoners at the bottom, and the slaves at the way bottom. So we will see huge social division later on next unit when we talk about India, but for now, based on the structure of the cities and the way houses were built, we think there wasn't a huge divide between the upper class and the lower class, although there was still a divide. Alright, so moving on to the Phoenicians. They were a civilization that kind of sprouted up a bunch of different city-states on the eastern Mediterranean, kind of modern-day Jordan, Israel area. And they're going to be close to the Mediterranean Sea, and they're going to use that to their advantage. They're going to develop a whole lot of different trade routes on the Mediterranean. So they're going to be one of the first civilizations that really goes all in on sea trade. So like we said, they're a group of powerful city-states in the eastern Mediterranean. They traded a lot over the sea. That's one of the big things you need to know. The other big thing you need to know is they invented the alphabet, or at least they're credited with inventing the alphabet. So whereas other civilizations we talked about maybe have pictograms or some form of writing like that, these guys are actually going to invent an alphabet and use that, and eventually we're going to get a more sophisticated written and spoken language. And they also invented glass and purple dye. So that's really all you need to know about the Phoenicians. So moving on to China, Chinese River Valley civilization. The Chinese are going to be located in the Huanghe River Valley, also known as the Yellow River. And then that river down here on the bottom is also the Yangtze. It's called the Yangtze River. So those are the two big rivers in China, the Huanghe River and the Yangtze. Just like the rest of the rivers in our other societies, there's going to be rich deposits of silt that are left behind. And in China, we're going to call this loess. It's kind of a yellowy substance. It's a rich deposit of silt, and it helps make farming better. And then, of course, the Huanghe River is going to have some disastrous flooding. So when it does flood, it's unpredictable, but it's very bad. It's going to wipe away towns, villages. It could wipe away pretty much everything you own. So you must prepare for the floods, and they're difficult to prepare for because they're unpredictable. China was isolated from the rest of the world. They had little trade with other civilizations. Remember that big Himalayan mountain range in India that separates India from China? They have an ocean to the east. So there's not going to be a whole lot of trade with China. They're going to develop independently for the most part during this period. Although that's the case with natural barriers, to the north and west of China, there are some plains where they are going to see frequent invasion over the course of Chinese history from the northern end of it. But they will grow up, they will develop in isolation from other civilizations. Societal advances, cities were built mostly of wood. The upper classes lived within the walls of a city, while peasants lived in huts outside the city. So cities were built of wood. They also had a system of writing where each character stands for a syllable or unit of language. And so that basically means that they kind of moved away from previous systems, and now people in all parts of China could learn the same system of writing, even if the spoken language was different. So the spoken language and the written language are going to be different. So it's good for unification purposes because people in different provinces could learn the same system of writing. They could understand writing from different areas, and that makes it easy to unify a big chunk of land. But the disadvantage is there's a huge number of characters. If you can imagine one character or picture for each syllable that you speak, that's a huge number of characters. So really only the kind of the wealthy and the scholars who devote their lives to it can learn all of the language. Most people will only know parts. So advantage and disadvantage of the writing system. Other advances, coined money was introduced. So we're going to move away from the barter system, which was, I'll trade you 3 of my horses for 3 of your pigs. We're going to move away from that, and we're going to introduce coin money. And then roads and canals were built all over China to stimulate trade and agriculture. So moving on to government and social structure. The big thing with Chinese government, we know that there are dynasties. We have dynasties in China that are basically ruling families. So we know the leaders are hereditary, and that hereditary family is going to be a dynasty. We're going to call it a dynasty in China. And the dynasty usually has the mandate of heaven, which is divine approval, as the basis for royal authority. And what that means is the king or the dynasty, whoever the head of the dynasty is, he gets his power from the gods. The common people see the ruling king as an instrument of the gods, and they think that because he's the king, he has the approval of the gods. So if he loses that mandate, if, say, a big flood happens or there's corruption in the government of some kind, if he loses kind of that approval, the common people might say, hey, this guy doesn't have the divine approval anymore. He lost the mandate of heaven, and we're going to have to find someone else who has the mandate. So Chinese dynasties are all about gaining the mandate of heaven and losing the mandate of heaven, and it's called the dynastic cycle, and we'll get into that more in the next unit. Social structure, there's a big divide between the nobles and peasants, and then it's just kind of our standard social structure that we always see. You have the king, underneath him are the priests, the nobles, the soldiers, and then kind of a step lower is your peasants, your everyday people, and then finally there's your slaves. So family is going to be a key part of Chinese society. Ancestors are linked to religion. And then we have big time respect for parents. That's a big part of Chinese society. And these are kind of ancient traditions that go way back in Chinese society, and eventually we'll see them in more depth as far as Confucianism and Buddhism go. You'll see the importance of ancestors and respect for parents. So this last slide is just kind of the mandate of heaven, and we'll get into it more in the next unit, but the gist of it is a new dynasty kind of rises up and it gains the mandate of heaven, and everything runs smoothly for a while. Unfortunately, the government usually comes corrupt, or there's famine or a flood or something, and the commoners kind of turn on them and say that they lost the mandate of heaven, and then a new emperor is usually crowned. So that's India, China, and Phoenicia. Those are the key points you need to know. There you go.